Today, we're tackling a really crucial but often overlooked part of the OSI model. I'm talking about layer 5, the session layer. It's kind of the silent coordinator of our online world, and in this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain and see exactly how it works. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been on an important video call, maybe a Zoom or a Teams meeting, and your internet just flickers for a second? But then when it comes back, you're just back in the meeting. You didn't have to log in again. You didn't have to re-enter the meeting ID. How does that actually happen? Well, believe it or not, that smooth experience isn't just magic. It's actually the work of a very specific part of our networking architecture. And that's the fifth layer of the OSI model, the session layer. It's like this invisible force that keeps our digital conversations stable and connected, even when things go a little wrong. So what is this layer really doing behind the scenes? Well, the easiest way to get your head around it, and it's a great analogy, is to think of the session layer as the ultimate conversation manager for applications. Okay, so if we're being a bit more formal, the OSI model defines the session layer as the one responsible for three key things: opening, managing, and closing communication sessions between two devices. And a session? Well, it's really just a continuous conversation, a logical connection between two apps that need to talk to each other for a while. And honestly, that conversation manager analogy is just perfect, isn't it? Because it doesn't just connect two things and walk away. No, it manages the entire interaction. It's handling all the little details in the background to make sure the dialogue is stable and orderly from start to finish. So we can actually break down the session layer's job into three main parts. You can think of it like a formal meeting, It has a clear beginning, a middle where all the work gets done, and a nice clean end.
First up, you've got session establishment. This is the initial handshake where two applications agree to talk. It often handles authentication too, to make sure everyone is who they say they are. Then we have session management. This is really the core of its job. It keeps the connection alive, and this part is super important. It maintains checkpoints. This is the secret sauce behind our video call example. If the connection drops, it can just pick up from the last checkpoint instead of starting all over. And finally, there's session termination. This makes sure the conversation ends gracefully, closing the connection and freeing up all the computer's resources.
And here's the bottom line. Without this careful management, every single tiny network hiccup would mean starting from scratch. Seriously, just imagine having to re-upload a huge file from the very beginning just because your Wi-Fi dropped for 1 second. That's the kind of frustrating world we'd live in without the session layer. All right, so that's enough of the theory. Let's talk about where you actually see the session layer in action in the real world. And trust me, you probably interact with it way more often than you think.
So the session layer's rules are used by a bunch of different protocols and technologies. For example, you have things like RPC, or Remote Procedure Call, which lets a program on your computer run code on another computer somewhere else. Then there's SMB, which is used for file sharing. It relies on the session layer to keep that connection stable, especially for big files. And of course, SIP, the protocol behind most VoIP calls and video conferences, absolutely depends on it to manage all those complex conversations.
A perfect real-world example is online banking. Think about it. When you log in, a secure session is created. That's step one. Then, as you click around, checking your balance or making a transfer, the session is kept active to make sure you stay logged in. And finally, when you hit that logout button, or maybe if you're inactive for too long, the session is properly terminated. It's the session layer managing that whole process from start to finish. Okay, so to really understand what the session layer does, it's also super important to know what it doesn't do. Remember, the whole point of the OSI model is that each layer has its own specific job, and layer 5 is very focused. For example, it does not encrypt your data. That's the job of layer 6, the presentation layer. It also doesn't decide how your data gets routed across the internet. That's up to layer 3, the network layer. And it doesn't guarantee that every single data packet arrives safely and in order. That's a job for layer 4, the transport layer. See? The session layer is laser-focused on one thing: managing the conversation. Now, this role as the conversation gatekeeper brings us to a really critical topic: security. Because if you're an attacker and you can take control of the session, well, you can control the entire interaction. And that makes the session layer a very attractive target. Yeah, this makes it one of the most critical layers when we talk about cybersecurity. A single mistake in how a session is managed can take a secure, trusted connection and just blow it wide open, creating a massive vulnerability for a serious attack. And attackers have come up with some pretty clever ways to exploit this. You've probably heard of session hijacking. That's exactly what it sounds like. An attacker literally steals your active session ID and takes over your connection. Then you have other nasty things like session fixation, where an attacker tricks you into using a session ID they already know, or replay attacks, where they just capture your login details and use them again later. So, what's the difference between a secure session and a hijacked one? Well, a secure session is protected. It has things like short timeouts if you're inactive and uses really strong, unpredictable session IDs. But a hijacked session? That's basically giving an attacker the keys to your account. They get a free pass to do anything you can do, whether that's stealing your data or even making transactions.
All right, moving away from scary attacks for a minute, a lot of those really common, super frustrating problems you have online are actually session layer issues. You know that feeling when you're on a website and it feels like it's logging you out every 5 minutes for no reason? Yep, that's very often a layer 5 problem.
So if you keep getting logged out, it could just be that the website's session timeout is set to be way too short. Or if you see those session expired errors all the time, especially on a big site, it might mean the different servers on their end aren't talking to each other properly to keep your session in sync. The key thing here is these aren't usually network failures, they're problems with how the conversation is being managed. All right, let's wrap this up and bring it all together. We've really unpacked what the session layer is, what its critical jobs are, and why it's so important for both a good user experience and for strong security. So what are the main things to remember? First, the session layer is the network's conversation manager. Second, its job is all about those 3 phases: establishing, managing, and terminating sessions. Third, it's the reason we have a smooth, uninterrupted online experience. And finally, number 4, protecting this layer is absolutely critical for application security. So where are we heading next in our journey down the OSI stack? We're moving down to layer 4, the transport layer. This is where we get to meet the real heavy lifters of the internet, TCP and UDP. We're going to explore how they handle the huge challenge of getting data from one place to another reliably. It's going to be a good one, so I'll see you there.
Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.